Welcome to The Intentional Investor with Matt Zeigler, where he and his guests explore the intersection of investing and life, portfolio and purpose. Nothing in this podcast is investment advice. Nothing in this podcast is advising you to buy or sell any security or to do anything with your money. Seriously, you should only act on investment advice from someone you know and who knows your unique situation. We are not that person. Matt Zeigler is a managing director at Sunpoint Investments, and the opinions expressed on this show do not necessarily reflect the opinions of Sunpoint Investments or of Second Foundation Partners. Securities discussed in the podcast may be holdings of Sunpoint Investments.
Welcome to The Intentional Investor on the Epsilon Theory YouTube channel. I'm your host, Matt Zeigler, and I'm joined today. Does he need an introduction? He doesn't need it, but he deserves it. One of the best grants since Ulysses S., unifying listeners globally with insights. One of the best grants since Cary Grant, dare I say, extra emphasis on the Hitchcock period. Not afraid of a little dark underbelly or conspiracy. And absolutely, he is better Grant than Hugh. He's worth 5 weddings and a funeral in my book, at least. He's observed his fair share of interest rates, so I'll put him above that. Interest rates. I said that is a Freudian slip of some sort, but I'm going to say interest rates observer. And I got to say, straight out of Matthew James's diary, he's my favorite Grant. It's the man who makes you go, and I've been oohing and eyeing at his interview fireworks for years, so the pleasure is all mine. Grant Williams, welcome to The Intentional Investor.
I don't know what to say. That is by far the greatest introduction I've ever been given, and also by far the biggest reach in so many directions for anyone introducing me. So I commend you on that, because who would have thought you could be that far wide of the mark in so many directions at the same time? But thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
You can be that far wide of the mark at the same time. And that is all the compliments in the world. My good sir. So I have to start with this. I mean, we're recording this. This is Monday, the 22nd. We've just seen Biden step out of the race. But I think more importantly,
wait, what?
I don't care. What? Did you think that was going to happen? No, I don't want to talk about Biden, though. I want to talk about Garrett Southgate stepping down in England. And I don't care who I lose on this one. Can we talk just for a second? Because you're going through something else over there. Can we start there? Can we talk about Garrett Southgate?
Yeah. Do you know what? Look, I mean, it's a funny one, and I'm conflicted on this. I think it's time for him to go. I commend him for what he did. You know, he took an England team that was a disaster, frankly, and mired in managerial controversy, and he stepped in to the void and took us places that in my lifetime we haven't been, and I'm incredibly grateful to him for that. But I think it was time for him to go. I think his tactical shortcomings were kind of found out, and football's kind of moved on. He has all the talent at his disposal to be winning these tournaments, and I think, you know, England fans, we're a short-tempered lot, and our expectations are way too high. But football is it's by far the national game. There isn't anything that comes close. And so, you know, we reserve the right to be completely unreasonable. You know, it's time for him to go. And the big question is who's going to replace him. And that is far more important to me, frankly, than who the Democrats choose to run against Trump.
And this is kind of why I want to start here. So first off, were you a Southgate fan? Did he matter at all to you as a player? Is this?
Well, look, he mattered when he missed that penalty in '96. He definitely mattered to me then.
Yes, he did.
You know, I was at the semi-final in Germany. It was heartbreaking. I mean, it was heartbreaking. But this, you know,
you were at that
this
game?
loss. I was at that game. Yeah, I was at that game. I've bumped into a lot of kind of footballers over the years, just in restaurants or bars, whatever. And I've never gone up to any of them, but I saw Alan Shearer last year, or a couple of years ago, in a golf club in the bar, and I couldn't help myself. I just went up to him. I said, "Look, I don't want to interrupt you. I just want to say thank you for the summer of 1996, which was the best summer of my life. You know, that summer was just magnificent. And you know, we lived and breathed the games. The team again came into it dysfunctional, and you know, there's all the stuff that happened in Hong Kong, and dentist chairs, and drinking, and getting stuffed into overhead bins on flight. It was a mess. But they got to the semi-final and came within half a goalpost of making it to the final. And it was just a fantastic summer to be English, to be working in the city of London. The weather was great. The games were on everywhere. And there was just a real phenomenal atmosphere in London. And even though, we lost that game, it was heartbreaking at the time. I look back on that summer with incredible fondness. And that was kind of my problem with this past tournament. And we're going to lose the non-football fans here, so you should cut me off any time you like, because I could talk football for hours with you. But I was upset that England had played so badly and gotten so far, because the joy that I had in previous tournaments of getting through, squeaking last-minute goals and stuff, which should be a joy, it just wasn't this time because we didn't deserve to win. So when we lost the final, I had no problem with it. I was over it in 5 minutes because we didn't deserve to win. So that was a really easy loss to take.
So I want to stay in 96. And I think this is actually, even if you're not a football, a soccer person, this is important. Where in 96 did you watch it? So 96 was the Euros, right? That was that was a Euro tournament. Where
right.
were you physically at the time? Where were you living at the time? What was going on?
I was in London. Thankfully, it was right before I left to go and move to New York. So I had that one summer, and I had it in London, and it was just magnificent. The whole of London was on fire with the tournament. The tournament obviously was in the UK, so that all the England games were at Wembley. So I got to go to the semi-final, which was terrific and heartbreaking in equal measure. And it was just one of those magical summers. We all have them in our youth. It's just the summer when everything just kind of clicks. The music, we're in the middle of kind of Oasis and Blur and all these great Britpop bands, and say the tournament in England. It was just a fabulous time to be. I was 29, I guess, that year. So it was a perfect time for me and a perfect summer with an imperfect result. But as I say, looking back on it now, I wouldn't trade the summer for the win. It was just a wonderful time to be in the UK.
Who else is there? Is your family around you? Is it just being 29 and being with friends? Like paint this picture a little bit more broadly. Where are you working? Who are you with?
I was there. I had my wife and my daughter who would have been 5 at the time. My mom was still around there. My dad was still around. He's still around. In fact, he's still hanging on there. God bless him. But it was for me. It was very much a friends and a work thing, because the games were on in the afternoons. So I'd be at the office, and we'd kind of sneak out to the pub and watch it with a bunch of guys from work. And then in the evenings, you'd either go to the pub with your mates, or you'd stay up in town and watch the games. In the big squares with the TVs, and it was just a phenomenal atmosphere. And so, I really enjoyed, more than anything else, just the way London came together and just had this, and the broader UK. I just happened to be in London. Just had this moment in time, and it really was a moment in time. So, and I got to share that with my buddies, my work colleagues, friends that I'm still buddies with. In fact, I spent this last weekend with a bunch of guys that I was friends with back then, and we all watched the game. In fact, 3 of us went to that game together, and we spent last weekend together. So it's
Really?
It was just, there's something magical about it, and I think that's one thing. Having been in America for as long as I was, and enjoying American sports as much as I did, that's the one thing America misses. And I haven't been there for the Copa America and the World Cup. It just doesn't seem to me to be that much of a national thing. You don't play national baseball against anybody else. You don't play American football against anything else. The closest you get, I guess, is the dream team at the Olympics. Maybe the Miracle on Ice. Those kind of once in a lifetime things, but you don't have this every 4 years. It's us against the world in a game like soccer. That's your national game. And that's something that you really have to experience to understand. It's just a magical time.
So I'm really happy you brought that specific piece of it up. Take me back. Now, do you grow up in a football family and a soccer family? Do you grow up?
Yeah, I did. My dad was a big fan of Fulham Football Club, and he grew up in Fulham near the ground, and he went. He kind of snuck into his first game as a young kid, and he took me there.
Cottage all the way back.
Yeah, exactly. And this was the amazing thing. He and I went to a game. We still go to games together, and he's 85 now, and we were sitting at a game a couple of years ago against Brighton, and we're sitting there at halftime chatting, and we were just kind of chatting about how long we've been going to the stadium. The seats are still the same wooden seats that have been there for years, and we realized that
Wow.
that he'd been going to that same stadium that year for 75 years, and I'd been going for 50, which is incredible, if you think about it. And to have that connection, football was always my first passion. I played every sport that I could growing up and was, half proficient at most of them. But football was always my first love. And my dad and I would go to those games every other week. We'd go to every home game. He taught me to drive, going to those games. It was just that was our time together, and we loved it then, and we love it now. And it's, I know I've got more games with him behind me than I have in front of him, but I'm determined to spend as many more of those afternoons and evenings with him as I can, knowing that the result doesn't really matter. The beauty of supporting a team like Fulham is the wins are so special. You don't expect to win. And so that's actually a good thing. The disappointment, is gone in a heartbeat, because you get upset about a loss and you think, well, hang on a second, what were we expecting here? So, that really has been, sports always played a big, big part of my life. And it's something that I truly love to do and to watch and to be a part of, and nothing more so than football.
What's the best memory of either, it doesn't even have to be a big match, but are there some matches or a match in particular that stand out in your mind of seeing with your dad, of being there and being present and experiencing that?
It's just so many.
I'm sure that many years.
I took him to we got to the Europa League final back in 2010, which was a wild idea. Fulham at a European final. I took my dad and my brother to Hamburg to watch that, and we just had a magnificent day. And we lost, as we were destined to do. We lost, but again, I was over it before we walked out the stadium. It's just been such a magnificent day. But the beauty of Fulham, it's not the great victories, because there haven't been that many, and it's not the defeats, but it's just the moments. I'll never forget coming back from my dad and I, when I was a kid, we always used to stand in the Hammersmith end behind the Fulham goal. And I came back from Japan. This would have been 1991, 92, and the team were, pretty abject back then. And there was a midweek cup game. I happened to be back from Tokyo, and I wanted to take my dad. I said, "Come on, we'll go to the Fulham game tonight." It was Carlisle at home in the cup. And we went there, and I said to my dad, "Right, I'm splashing out. We're going to get seats, and we'll sit right on the halfway line. It'll be fantastic." So we go into the turnstile, and I'll never forget, there was G and H block. And I knew that G block was on the halfway line, but the turnstiles were for both. So it's wet Wednesday in the middle of winter, and we show up at 7:00, and we're going in. The guy's reading his newspaper behind the turnstile, and I said to him, "Two, please, but can we have seats in G block, please?" And without looking up, he handed 2 tickets across to me, and he said, "You can sit where you fucking like, mate." And it was we got up there, and there was me, my dad, 2 guys with a dog, press corps, which amounted to 2 reporters who'd seen better days, and it's just those moments of following a team that are not steeped in glory, but they're your team, and there's something about that. There's something about that connection in sport that you have, and you don't often get to pick your team as a kid in the UK. A lot of teams are handed down from father to son, and it's a magical thing. If you don't like sport, you'll never understand it. And if you love sport, anyone listening to this knows exactly what I'm talking about. There's a connection with that community, that team, the wins and losses. I always say that sport is the thing that matters the most, that doesn't matter at all. And it's a beautiful thing.
When you think about growing up in sports, so I imagine like take me all the way back, little kid status. Is this the dominant conversation around the house? Like, is there anything talked about more than sports in the Williams family household, like at a holiday party?
That's a good question. My dad and I loved our football. My brother wasn't into sport at all. My mum wasn't into sport at all. So it would just be my dad and I talking about it. And it was certainly a big thing for us to talk about. But other than that, I would talk about it with all my buddies. A lot of them were fans of, they were split. Half of them were fans of teams like Crystal Palace and Charlton, which were local teams, and the other half were the kind of the traitors that went for Man United. Actually, Leeds at the time had a lot of fans because they were the big team at the time. But you can't grow up in England and not be exposed to to football. It's impossible, and it's not for everybody. And not everybody's a fan, but it's impossible not to be around it because we don't have basketball, baseball, football, hockey. We don't have that multitude. We have football, and then we have rugby and cricket. But rugby and cricket are so far behind football in terms of being the national game. It's not even close. And so you really got exposed to rugby or cricket depending on which school you went to. And I went to a school that played both. I played rugby and I loved rugby. I was never a cricket fan. It was way too boring for me to stand around for days on end waiting for the ball to come to you. I grew up sports mad, and that love of sport has stayed with me from that day to this.
So how's this connect? Like, as you grow up, when did you figure out you weren't going to be a professional footballer? When do you have that realization? Or you still, hey, if Harry Kane could get there, I have faith.
Right.
You're still eligible for your side.
Exactly right. I think there are 2 days, right? There are the days you realize you can't do it, and then the day you admit that to yourself finally, and they're often a few years apart. But I like every kid, I wanted to be a professional footballer, but I knew pretty early on that I wasn't going to be able to do it. I was good enough to play representative soccer, but I think whenever you start moving up in terms of talent in sport, whether it's football or whether it's golf or rugby, you get to a point where you realize you've reached your ceiling, and you go that one step and you realize just how much better than you the kids who are really good are. And golf is a perfect example of that. Another game that I love, and I've known guys, friends of mine whose kids have won scholarships to really good US universities. They're terrific golfers and they've won everything in England and just dominant golfers, and they get out there and they go out every day and they shoot 67, 68, 69, and they're up against kids that shoot 62, 63, 64 every day. And some of them grind and grind and grind, and some of them are smart enough to say, look, I get it. I'm really good, but these guys are better. And when you see that, when you first see real sporting talent, no matter what the sport is, when you see sporting talent like that, it's a phenomenal thing if you love any kind of game, and I've always enjoyed and sought out watching anybody do anything that they are really, really good at. There's something really, really captivating about seeing somebody do something they're good at, that they are better than you could ever possibly be. And somebody asked me this years ago, why do you watch sport? What is it about sport? And I kind of thought of that for a couple of days. I was trying to come up with an answer, and I realized that the answer was actually very simple. Is that whenever I go to watch sport, at some point during that contest, I will see someone do something that I'm incapable of doing. And it still takes your breath away. I was lucky enough to see Michael Jordan several times, Magic Johnson, Kobe, all these guys. I was lucky enough to watch them play. And, I was at the Madison Square Garden when Jordan dropped 55 on the Knicks after he came out of retirement. And to see that incredible talent and athletic ability up close is truly extraordinary. And I don't think you have to be a sports fan to know that when you see it and to appreciate just that level of talent and intensity. And so I'm getting a bit off the question here, but it's just something that I've always been drawn to because of my love for watching people do things that I can't do and that they're incredibly talented at.
So you realize you're not going to be the professional footballer. Like what's the
Pretty
thing
much.
that gets the interest going in like finance or any other direction? When
Yeah,
does
no,
life start to go, I need another path?
Yeah, no, I've told this story before, and it's absolutely true. My dad had a buddy that he knew he was in the city, but he was a company secretary for a small merchant bank, and he had a friend, my uncle Harry, who whenever he would come round for dinner, he would show me card tricks and he would tell me jokes, and he would sit with me. I was allowed to hang around the adults before I got sent up to bed before dinner, and he always had time for me, and he was just that larger than life character who always had stories. And you always, as a kid, he was the guy whose voice you heard from upstairs just before all the laughter started. He was just this larger than life character. And he had this trick where he would line up brandy glasses, all different kinds of brandy glasses, lay them on their side, Sorry, stand them up, and then he'd just go along the line and he'd pour a shot of brandy into each one. And you're supposed to the correct measure any glasses you lay on its side, it comes up to the rim. And you'd lay all these different brandy glasses down, and they came exactly up to the rim. And I remember that to this day, thinking how cool that was. That was the first really cool thing I think I ever saw. So I just
did you ever
I just
learn to
wanted
do that trick?
No.
Did you ever learn it?
No. I never even tried. But I remember thinking, all right, I have no idea what Harry does, but whatever it is, I want to do it because he's the coolest guy I know. And it turned out that he was a foreign exchange dealer. And so I didn't know what a foreign exchange dealer was, but that became what I wanted to be. And I went and did economics at school and started to understand the world of finance, which held a fascination for me. And my other love was history, and I was set to go and read history at university, and I got offered a job. I've been temping during a summer holiday, and I got offered a job in the back office of the Japanese trading room at a merchant bank in the UK. And it was a case of do I take this job and forego my university education, or do I go to university and come out in 4 years with a degree in history and then try and get this job? And it was a pretty easy decision for me, and one that my dad kind of agreed with. And back then in the 80s in the UK, you didn't need a university degree. You could get a job, walking off the street anywhere. It wasn't a prerequisite for getting hired. So it just made all the sense in the world for me. And so I kind of bumbled my way into the, not foreign exchange dealing, but equity trading, Japanese equity trading at the onset of that crazy Japanese bull market that ran through the late 80s stopped dead on January 31st, 1989. And that was, again, I was with these pals of mine over the weekend who all worked in that market back then. And we were all saying, we knew at the time, I knew as an 18, 19, 20-year-old kid, I knew that was the best job I was ever going to have. I knew it. And we talked about it at the time. It was, and it's proven to be the case. It was so much fun and exhilarating and scary and, terrifying. It had everything. And we had so much fun doing it. You spend all day on the phones trying to beat all your pals up over $1 here and $1 there. And then the bell would ring, the market closed, and you'd all go down to the pub together and drink and talk about all the stories and, talk about how you legged this guy over and how he got you back with that. It was just an amazing time for me to cut my teeth in those markets. And, I guess the good thing and the bad thing about starting that way was that the bad thing was it was never going to get any better than that. But the good thing was I got to experience it. And I look at how it is now to be working on trading desks and stuff around the world. And, I'm so glad that I'm out of that environment now. And I feel genuine sorrow for the people that missed that environment before, compliance and HR and all these things became the gods at which we all had to worship every day. In the city of London, the motto of the stock market, dictum meum pactum, my word is my bond. And there was an honesty, there was a trust, there was a level of, if you shake someone's hand, you don't need compliance. It's if you don't follow through on that, you get run out of town on a rail. You don't need compliance. And it was that kind of atmosphere. And as I said, way more fun and, a wild market to trade. And I cut my teeth in one of the craziest markets until now that we've had in the last 50 odd years. And, I'm grateful every day, not just for the fact that I cut my teeth then, but the people I cut my teeth with, many of whom are still very, very dear friends of mine to this day.
I want to go to that decision from the taking the job. And I understand it was a more acceptable path to say, I'm foregoing college, I'm foregoing uni for this job. Who do you talk to about that decision? Who helps you make that decision? Or is it a no-brainer?
It was a no-brainer to me for two reasons. One,
did you have to run it by anybody? Okay.
No, I didn't. I spoke to my dad about it, and he asked me the question. He said, "What are you going to do in 4 years if you come out with your thing?" I said, "Well, I'm going to try and get that job." He said, "Well, all right. Well, something to think about." I don't think he pushed me in the direction.
Yeah.
But again, look, I think growing up in the 70s and early 80s as I did, it was a much more independent time. We were left to fend for ourselves. People talk about this all the time, but we were the original latchkey kids, right? You got up in the morning before your mum, you went out on your bike with your pals, and whoever's house you were nearest at when you got hungry went there, and that mum fed you, and you came home when it got dark, and that was that. So there was a resiliency and a habit of just making decisions. There wasn't anyone on a daily basis that runs the bar. You had to make decisions and live and die by them. So it wasn't a big decision for me to make. I never felt that anyway. And certainly looking back on it, I've always been happy with the decision I made. And I think, it's funny, the first time it became an issue, ironically, was when I went to move to America in 1996. And to get my H-1B visa in America is a box ticking, what's your college degree? And of course I didn't have a college degree. And there's a stipulation in place that if you don't have a college degree, they will accept, I think it was 3 years of real world experience counts for 1 year of a college degree, which I always found was probably the wrong way around. But I'd done my 12 years at that point in time. And so I qualified for the kind of exemption. But that always struck me as a very strange way to think of things. I think I learned more in those 12 years, having kind of lived and worked in Japan and seen the things I've seen in markets. I learned way more in 1 year than I would have learned in a 4-year college degree. But that's just the system in the US. That's how it works over there, how it's always worked over there. I get the feeling the pendulum might be starting to move back the other way, with people trying to learn trades instead of you getting liberal arts degrees, et cetera, et cetera. But I was fortunate that at the time I had this decision to make. It really, I couldn't have gotten it wrong. That was the beauty of it. If I'd chosen to go to college, I would have ended up, doing something I loved and hopefully come out with a degree. But not choosing to do that, or choosing not to do that, rather, I should say, was never going to impact me negatively in my career.
So what happens between the Japanese equities trading desk and the move to the US? What jobs take place over there? What knocks you off the Japanese equities desk?
Well, the market. The market was wild.
Right.
And I'd been working in London for 2 or 3 years, and my boss moved out to Tokyo. We lost our entire team in Tokyo. They got poached by Bearings. And he went out to kind of steady the ship, and he called me and said, "Look, do you want to come out and work in Japan with me?" And I was like, "You're damn right I do. I'll be there on Monday." And so I went. I didn't know what I was getting myself in for, but I just figured, again, down to making decisions, I didn't have to run that by anybody. I literally said on the phone, "I'll be there next week." And I just knew that if I didn't like it, I could go home. You can always go home. Getting away is the tricky thing, because there are visas and work permits and all these things that you have to navigate, but you can always go home. If you don't like where you are, you got a passport, you could be home in 24 hours, no matter where in the world you are. So I kind of embraced that and went out to Japan and caught the last 9 months of that insane bull market on the ground in Tokyo. And then, the market peaked December 31st, 1989. And it stopped going up, but it started going down. And it took a few years, but the market kind of dwindled away, and interest dwindled away, and the big spreads got arbitraged out, and there wasn't as much money to be made in Japanese markets anymore. And so the team got smaller. I moved on to the Asian convertible trading desk and traded converts for a while. And it was just like a natural progression for me. I kind of went where there was something to do. And was fortunate that I kept getting moved to places to do something. And so, I traded JGBs. I traded when there was still a yield on them. I traded equities. I traded warrants. I traded convertible bonds. I traded GDRs and ADRs. And I just kind of kept finding something to do, and great people to do it with. And, I loved every minute of it. I really did. I didn't mourn it when I stepped away from a day-to-day trading role, because I had such a good time, and it just wasn't as much fun anymore. But, Matt, it's, and I'm sure you've experienced this in any career, no matter where you go or what you do, it's the people. It's always the people you work with. And I've been lucky to work with some brilliant individuals, just supremely good traders, good thinkers, and good people. And I've made so many lifelong friends in the different countries I've worked in. And, I stay in touch with all of them, and I still travel a lot, so I see them all. And a lot of these guys outside the markets are, I think, everybody of my vintage who's retired is much happier now. They kind of stare at what's going on with disbelief and perplexity, and just cannot figure out for the life of what's going on. And the thing I hear most often is, thank God I don't have to do that every day anymore, because it must be exhausting.
So do you come to New York first? Where in the States do you land when you get the visa exemption for your skipping of school?
I was working in Manhattan for UBS, and we went to live in Darien, Connecticut. We had a 5.5-year-old, and our second child was on the way. So she was actually born in Greenwich, Connecticut. My youngest, Bronte, who's now 27. So we lived in Darien, Connecticut. And again, I had as luck would have it, a very good friend of mine who I'd worked with previously. He lived up there, and he kind of showed me the ropes. And I loved life in Connecticut. It was a fairly long commute into Manhattan, but I was happy to do it. And I've always loved America. I went to America when I was 11 years old, first time, to Detroit, of all places. My dad was over there for a board meeting and took the family. The first place I landed was Detroit in 1978. What? So you can just imagine, as an English kid growing up in a country where 10 stories was a skyscraper to me, and here I am in the middle of Detroit, in the middle of
the 70s Detroit,
in the 70s, right? Boomtown.
Yeah,
no, not Detroit now.
Right.
This was, it was wild, and it America just blew me away in every possible way and from every possible angle. I just fell in love with it then and there, and I've been in love with it ever since, And so I spent that time in Connecticut, loved it. Got sent out to Hong Kong, spent a few years out in Hong Kong. Again, loved it. Had a fantastic time in Hong Kong. Went back to America briefly, and then on to Australia. And I've been fortunate, extremely fortunate, to live and work in all these incredible countries. And it's something I've always counseled anyone that's asked me, if you get the chance to work abroad, take it, because it'll do more for you in terms of opening your eyes and broadening your horizons and meeting new people and finding out different ways in which the world works than any holiday trip or any reading will ever do you. And I've been, again, incredibly fortunate to have lived in 6 or 7 countries, and I've loved every one of them for different reasons. And a part of that, I think, is they happen at different times of your life. I was in Japan in my 20s, which was just wild and crazy. I was in Hong Kong in my 30s, which is perfect time to have 2 young kids and be in Hong Kong. I was in New York in my kind of late 20s, early 30s. Again, a brilliant time to be in New York. And then as I got older and was raising kids, I went to Australia, and there's no better place to raise young kids than Australia. My kids wouldn't know how to turn a PlayStation on. They were just outside the whole time, And so, I'm extremely, extremely fortunate to have had the career I've had, and I'm grateful for it every single day, believe me.
Moving a family around and just thinking about it, like being a father and just, providing and all the things that go in with this. How hard was it to move a family cross-continent so many times?
Yeah, it's such a great question. And this is the one thing that I've struggled with, and I've thought a lot about over the years, because, I grew up in the same house from the age of 3 until I left home, when I was 22 and bought a house myself. Imagine that, being 22 and being able to afford a deposit on a house. So I grew up in that same house in the same street. All my buddies were in that street. I'm still friends with my really close friends. I was at my best friend's mother's 90th birthday party 2 weeks ago back in the UK.
Amazing.
And I just grew up with that group of friends that were constant, and we went everywhere together and we did everything together. And there's something magical about, I remember the first time I watched Stand By Me. That was my childhood, right? I had that group of buddies that you could just be merciless with. And at any given point in time, 3 of you would be ganging up on one guy, and then it would all switch around. There was something about that movie that really connected with me, because that's exactly what my childhood was like. And so with my own kids, it's the one thing, I've talked to my eldest daughter, who's 33, about this before. I thought they didn't have that. They didn't have that one place to call home that they grew up from. Or they didn't have that one group of friends that stayed with them through their entire childhoods. And I don't regret it because there's no point in that. But I often wondered, was that the right decision for them? But then you kind of flip it around and say, okay, what did they get in return for me making that exchange on their behalf? And my kids have lived in 6 countries. They have friends all over the world. Good friends that they've been to school with and lived and hung out with properly, not just pen pals or Facebook friends. They have a network all around the world of people that they've grown up with and spent time with, and the beauty of social media and stuff and emails coming along when it did was that they could genuinely maintain those friendships. So I don't think there's a right and a wrong way to do it. I know that thinking back on it, had I changed my career path because I felt worried about moving the kids out of school, I feel like that would have been the wrong thing for me and would have been the wrong thing ultimately for my kids. But again, you just don't know. It's like anything. You make the best decision you can at the time. And all of these decisions were considered ones. Nothing was a quick, hey, let's go and do this. And you hope for the best. And my kids have certainly, they've traveled the world and they've lived in amazing countries and they have those friendships and they have that experience. And I think overall it's been a net positive. Maybe you get my daughter on here and she disagrees with me, but I don't think she would. I think my kids are happy to have lived in America and lived in Hong Kong and lived in Australia and Singapore and done these things and taken the trips and stuff we have and made the friends they have. So, I'm a great believer there's not much point in looking back. I won't say there's no point, but there's not much point in looking back because you can't change anything. And look, we all make bad decisions ultimately at some point in our lives, and you have to learn to live with those because they'll torture you. And I can honestly say that I don't think those decisions were bad decisions for me or my kids. So hopefully they will agree with me.
You had kids, you started early enough that, especially working in finance, you've had more than one crisis through their younger and their developing years. How much does the 97, the Asian currency thing, long-term capital management, the tech bubble, then the financial crisis. You're a father with kids through all these periods. That's different than a slight downturn at the office or in the manufacturing plant. How's that impact your family?
Yeah, I don't know how the right way to put this. I never took it too seriously, and I think part of that came from those early days in the Japanese market were very volatile. So I very quickly got used to big wins and big losses. And I got used to watching people who were more experienced than me not get too crazy when they had a big win and not let big losses get them down. The 87 crash was really my baptism, if you like. I was like a deer in headlights that day. I didn't know what to do, didn't know how to handle it, had no idea. That was a stressful morning. But I look back on it now as a stressful morning. It was the guys around me snapped into, okay, it's happened. Here's how we handle it. And you just kind of, you get pulled along by that. And so I think, one of the beauties of the career I've had and the places I've worked are the people who I've been able to look upon as mentors who've helped me, not all of them deliberately, just by being there and being good examples and good role models have kind of shown me rather than taught me how to do certain things. And I think when you're young and impressionable as I was, I was 20 when the 87 crash hit, and I only had my first trading book for, a few months. And when everyone's calm around you in a crisis, you can't help but be calm, you know. It's funny. I years later, I was on a flight from Kuala Lumpur to London, one of these flights that leaves KL at midnight, and I'm sitting upstairs. It was an old 747. I'm sitting upstairs in the bubble, and there's two groups of seats with the emergency exit, the up top in between. I'm sitting on the front row of the back half of those seats, if that makes sense, with the emergency exit right there. And as we took off, and we got, I don't know, 10, 15 seconds off the ground, there's a massive bang, and one of the engines blows, and the whole sky is lit up with fire. And I'll never forget how quiet the plane was. There was no screaming. There was no panic. Everyone was so shocked. And because it was quiet, I think everybody stayed quiet, and I was lucky enough to have a little old lady sitting next to me who just grabbed my hand, and you kind of instantly go into protection mode, right? For whatever reason, you're not thinking what's going on. You're thinking about the person next to you that is frightened, and you're trying to calm them down. And it was a 747, so it was one engine that blew. They had three more, and it's a great story to tell. But apart from the initial shock of the noise and the flames, I don't remember having that feeling of, oh my God, we're all going to die kind of thing, and that's a much more existential crisis than waking up long of every Japanese stock in the world and the market being down 6%. But still, this idea that if people are calm around you, you kind of go, well, I guess I shouldn't really get stressed out. I guess I should just be calm, because that seems to be what everybody else is doing. So I never, when I say I never took it seriously, that's probably a little bit too flippant. It's the wrong choice of words. But what I mean by that is I tried never to take it home with me. I knew there was only so much I could do between the market closing in whatever center I was working in and the opening the next day. I knew that I had guys in the overnight sessions looking after things for me who were every bit, if not way more savvy than I was at the game. And so what's the point? My dad is a big fan of the movie Bridge of Spies. And if anyone that hasn't seen it, it's a kind of a Cold War thriller, Steven Spielberg film with Tom Hanks and Mark Rylance in it. And Mark Rylance plays the Soviet defector, and Tom Hanks is lawyer, and his lawyer, he's his lawyer. And he just keeps asking this question, are you worried? And Mark Rylance just always says, would it help? And I've always kind of gone back to that, when I heard that, I was like, yeah, that's kind of it, I mean, we're all going to get faced with challenges. We're all going to have days in the markets that really, really burn, but you have to try and be rational. And if a quick reaction is what's warranted, i.e. get me out of this now, you have to have the courage to do it. And if a more thoughtful approach is the best thing to do, you have to somehow find it in yourself to have that presence of mind to stay calm. And so, as I said, I was around calm people early on in my career, and all the way through, I've been around calm people, and that's helped me, I think, for many, many years, not get too high and too low, and not let things shake me out of what I need to do.
Where in this whole journey do you start? What comes first, the writing or like the capturing tidbits of talking to people? Not necessarily the interviews, because I think that comes later, but
yeah,
when's this desire to record things come?
It's a necessity is the mother of invention, as they say. And I had actually resigned in very early 2009. I went through the crisis. I was working for Credit Suisse. Excuse me. And I was down in Australia, and I was really bothered by how that was handled internally. And looking back on it now, obviously, I completely understand the position that the people making decisions were in, but there was a headlessness to the way it was conducted and the way the risk was handled that I found very hard to take, because I'd kind of, for a year or so, I'd been expecting something like that to happen. and I was positioned for it. I was actually, when all that stuff started going wrong, I was having some really good months. And it wasn't that, but it was the fact that the order came on down from New York, right? I want everything chopped. I want all the books flattened by the end of business, no matter what, just get flat. And, I had a problem with that, because if that's the ultimate decision, that's totally fine, but don't make it blind. And so I was trying to get in touch with the guy in New York who was making these decisions. I sent him, I said, look, before I do this, can we talk? Because you're going to want the book I've got. It's going to make you money. It's going to offset some of the other losses elsewhere. At least, let me talk you through what I've got. And I think you'll be glad we've still got it. And the reply came back, don't care, just get rid of it. And, that I really struggled with that at the time. And I did as I was told. I was a good soldier. There was nothing else to do, really. But that to me was kind of the final nail in the coffin for me of that investment bank life. And we worked our way through that, and we got into very early 2009. I just said, okay, look, I'm out. And so my plan had been to take some time off and just hang out with my kids, basically, down in Australia. And a friend was starting a business up in Singapore and asked me if I would go up there and help him. And it seemed like it would be an interesting thing to do. And, so we talked it over again and thought, hey, you know what? Doing this might be a great idea for a couple of years. And so I went to do that. And the guy that was backing that business ended up losing all his money in some obscure French property deal. And so the business folded. So suddenly I'm out of the financial business for, best part of a year. The business has gone through hell. People have been laid off left and right. And the chance of me as a then, 41-year-old trader finding profitable employment was pretty low, And so I ended up through some friends of mine that I'd known the business for a long time, they hired me to be a sales trader. And so suddenly, after years and years of trading and joking with my buddies on the sales trading desk about what a cushy life they had and how easy their job was thanks to me on the trading desk, I've suddenly got to try and be a sales trader, which I had no practical experience of at all. And that was really, I sat and thought about, okay, how the hell am I going to do this? How the hell am I going to get enough business to keep me gainfully employed? And I was fortunate that because I'd been in Asia for such a long time and I knew so many people, I emailed a whole bunch of clients on the buy side and just said, look, do me a favor, can you just answer these few questions for me? And they were simple questions, how many morning rundowns do you get every day? And how many afternoon wrap-ups do you get every day? And how many Bloomberg messages do you get a day? And how many of these things do you read? And what I got back was amazing to me. On average, they would get 30-odd rundowns from brokers in the morning and 30-odd rundowns, recaps at the end of the day. And they get 200 messages during the day on their Bloomberg machines with bids and offers and God knows what. And all of them had one guy that they read. Now, it wasn't the same guy, but everyone had one guy and they had a backup guy in case he was on holiday. And it wasn't necessarily the guy that backed him up at that same firm. And I was sitting there thinking, geez, every firm has 29 out of 30 odd people spending time doing something that's largely a waste of time for everybody involved. And so how can I be accretive to your process? And most important of all, how can I not be a waste of time? What do I need to do to not waste people's time? And so, this was the early days of kind of the financial internet. Zero Hedge was a bulletin board, and if you went and looked, you could find interesting things that were happening. You had the means to do it, but most people, the research they were sending out was very, Wall Street Journal, Financial Times. It was all very mainstream headliney stuff. And I've always been a voracious reader, and I'd be up early in the morning reading all these kind of weird, wonderful things. And so I just started putting together every day a note that I figured would include things that weren't being blasted down the the wires by everybody. It was like, I know everyone's going to talk to you about the fire at the coal plant and things. There's no point in me talking about that. There's no point about it. But what about this palm oil story in Indonesia? That might be something that you're not hearing about. So it's just a question of, okay, can I come up with some information that is interesting and useful to you, is not something you're going to read elsewhere, and probably most importantly, being able to share that, is that going to make you look good to your bosses? Is that going to make you look smart or well-connected or plugged in or thoughtful or whatever? And that was the birth of Things That Make You Go Home. It was a daily note at that point. The title just kind of jumped at me from the song, and that was really what I was trying to do, was just to make people think. And that was it. I'd never been a writer. I'd never had any talent for writing or any desire to be a writer. I just kind of, like many things in my life, fell ass backwards into it and tried to make the best of it. And I found that, people really appreciated this. They enjoyed the tone of it. I tried to make it as conversational as I could. They liked the fact that they knew when they opened it, they didn't know what they were going to read, but they knew it wasn't going to be stuff they were reading elsewhere. And that somehow kind of morphed and shaped and changed over the years into the letter I'm writing now, 15 years later. And it's been a revelation to me. And again, I wish I could say there was some master plan. I fell backwards into something. I got really, really lucky that people enjoyed it. And it's managed to, sustain itself for 15 years, which is, probably 14 years longer than I would have expected.
Well, why do you keep doing it? What keeps you from stopping?
I love it. And pure and simple. I get to sit down every month. I get to think about the world. I get to decide what I think is important. And I think I've been incredibly fortunate that I've carved out something that allows me to talk about anything that I find interesting. I have not pigeonholed into equities or the US or Asia or convertible bonds. And establishing that trust with the audience that whatever the hell this idiot's going to write about this month, it's not going to be a waste of my time reading it. I may not be interested in Japan, or I may not be interested in Tesla or the US housing market, but it's not going to be a waste of my time. I'm going to learn something that's going to be hopefully borderline entertaining at least. And that's been the biggest gift to me, has been to build that trust with people who might have no interest in what I'm writing about, but they'll give me that time because they feel like it'll be interesting and thought provoking and I might learn something. And so that's why I do it. I get to write about something that I truly find interesting every month and share those thoughts with a group of people who have become a huge part of my life over the years. And I've still got so many subscribers that have been there from day one. And it's a dialogue, I get the feedback and people are happy to tell me why I'm an idiot or what I got wrong and what I should have included. And it's just, it's an incredible thing, to build a community like that and to end up ultimately being a very small part of it in actual fact. You may be the fulcrum of it, but you're a very small part of it. And you get the benefits of that community every time you put finger to keyboard, and it's incredible.
What's the transition? And you can glue together other pieces of this to the degree you want to, but I was always, this is a fascinated outsider question. So you're writing this, you can connect the beginning of Real Vision if you want to plug in the details. Yep. I know you've discussed this plenty of places elsewhere, but this, from being the person who's curious and writing about this stuff and exploring these ideas in the written word, to becoming the guy who all of a sudden is doing these interviews and all of a sudden these like 2-hour interviews in the Real Vision days and everything else, where it's going, seeing you operate in real time was different than reading you on the page. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I think, again, it's another great question, Matt. For me, when we launched Real Vision, it was a stupid idea, frankly. What right did we have launching that? We had no experience at all. And some of the early decisions we made bear that out incredibly well. But the mission was simple. The mission was to talk to peers in the industry, the same way we would at every industry dinner we'd been to, every pint of beer we'd had in a pub with someone else in the business, every sales meeting, every trading meeting. I've never walked away from a dinner table, a bar, or a meeting room without something rattling around my head when you just talk to these incredibly experienced people in finance. So the mission was simple. Okay, how do we sit down and have conversations with people and just talk and just happen to have cameras there? Let's have the conversations that we would have over a dinner, but just have the camera there. And is there a way we can forget about the camera? And is there a way we can just keep these conversations peer to peer? And the beauty of it was we were able to do that. And I think a lot of that came from the fact that when we started through necessity rather than anything else, we had to rely on people we knew to do interviews, because no stranger is going to hear from some random guy who wants to interview him and give up, an hour of his life for them. So we went to friends and we asked them if they'd do this for us, and most of them agreed. And then once we did that, we were able to say to them, hey, look, who do you know who's really smart? And the thing that struck me very early on was that, yes, the Jeff Gundlachs, yes, the Bill Ackmans, yes, the Carl Bass of the world are brilliant, brilliant thinkers, gifted communicators, successful at what they do. But for every Jeff Gundlach, there's 100 guys that you've never heard of that are absolutely on Jeff's level, but they've either not caught at the spotlight, or they've shied away from the spotlight, or they've been fortunate or unfortunate enough to never have its glare land on them. And so we found ourselves in this position where, how do you build an audience? Do you build it through the quality of content, or do you build it by having a string of big names that will bring people to tune in and listen? And again, I came back to the relationship that I had developed with my written audience, and this idea of trust, this idea that we're entering into a trade here. You're going to give away, and I recently did a presentation about this exact topic. You're going to give away your most precious asset, which is time. And you're going to give that to me in exchange for something you have no idea what it is. So I have to honor that, and I have to make sure that what you exchange that asset for is a worthy exchange. And so for me, it was always about the content. It was always about the conversation, the knowledge that could be shared and imparted, and the integrity of that conversation. The idea that you didn't have to have a format. You didn't have to always have a trade idea at the end of a conversation. You have to honor your audience and say, look, this is going to be interesting and you're going to learn something from it. I don't know if that's going to be immediately applicable to you, but learning how smart people think rather than learning what smart people think, I think is a much better long-term investment, because if you understand how people think, you can learn to think that way yourself and come up with 20 different ideas. But if someone tells you what they think, it's a moment in time, and that what can change like that. Overnight, some piece of news come out and the what completely goes away, but the how remains and the why remains. So I always focused on the how and the why. And what you find is once you go down that road, once you start asking people how and why, you do end up in much longer, more thoughtful conversations, because oftentimes people are unaccustomed to being asked how and why. They're always asked what. They're always asked what and when. And the smart ones never answer both. But they're the things that everybody wants to know, what and when. And that's the kind of impatience that we all have in terms of, okay, I want to know what's going to happen. I want to know when, because I can make money out of that. But I've talked about this so many times, but by far the interview that I've got the most feedback about was my conversation with Tony Deden, who no one at that point had ever heard of, for very good reason, that Tony didn't want anybody to hear of him. That he's a very private man, and he always has been, he always will be. He didn't want to do that. I had to cajole Tony into doing that conversation with me. But what did we end up with? We ended up with 2.5 hours of me talking to someone no one had heard of. No one had any idea who he was, what he did, but they trusted that if I'm going to serve up 2.5 hours this guy, it's going to be worth their time. And once you've built that trust, you have to honor it and you have to deliver. But, the most extraordinary thing about that interview, and again, I've spoken about this many times because it's the one interview that everybody wants to talk to me about. The one thing I cared about when we did that conversation, and honestly, the only thing I cared about was that after it, having persuaded him to do it, Tony wouldn't regret doing it. I didn't want him to wish he hadn't done it. I didn't want him to fall foul of the comment section cavaliers. And that was my one concern. And putting a 2.5 hour interview out there at the time was revolutionary for Real Vision. We hadn't done anything over an hour at that point. And it's the one time I dug my heels in this. I'm not editing this thing down. There is absolutely no way I'm editing this down. It's just too good. And so when that aired, the night that conversation aired, I was genuinely nervous. I wanted the response to be the response that Tony deserved. And I trusted the audience to give me that response because we'd built this relationship up, but you just don't know, right? There's always this doubt in your mind. I wasn't worried for me. I wasn't worried for Real Vision because I knew this conversation was good. What I didn't want was, I'm not going to listen to 2.5 hours of some guy I've never heard of. The kind of, I'm not even going to listen to it, but I'm going to pile on. And so, it went out as all these interviews did at the time at, the wee small hours of the morning. And I sat and watched the comments section. I sat and watched it. I kept refreshing it. And one by one, slowly these comments started coming in. And they were all a variation of, why did you cut that short? Why have I never heard of this guy? Who is this guy? This is a breath of fresh air, blah, 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 blah. All the things that I instinctively and genuinely felt was the reality, other people seeing that too. And, subsequently that video was put on YouTube in its entirety. Now, for anyone listening to this who hasn't seen it, I would recommend you find it, Tony Deden, Deden.
Double recommend.
Yeah, it's an extraordinary conversation with a truly extraordinary man. But the really remarkable thing is if you go to that video and you scroll through the comments on YouTube, no less, which is, if you get 6 comments into a YouTube video and it hasn't become a left-right cesspool, something weird has happened. You could scroll for a week down there in the comments and not find anything but praise for that conversation. And that is something magical because Tony didn't talk about what or when at all. It was all about how and why. And so, that conversation was the embodiment of what I personally wanted to do. And it's been my guiding light ever since. It's the interview that I've tried to live up to ever since. And, I'll keep trying to live up to that because I think it's a worthy benchmark to try and reach. And that really has been kind of how that journey happened. It's just a genuine curiosity about how the world works, about how people think, about why they think the way they do. And I'm interested in the what and the when, but really as an afterthought. Not if I have an hour-long conversation, I never get round to the what or the when. I'm perfectly happy. Sometimes it comes up 10 minutes in, and it's always interesting. But I'll never steer a conversation with the aim of getting to a what or a when by the end of it, because I just think that's disingenuous for the audience. Geez, it was
so. Where's this go? No, but we got to the Tony Deden interview, which is critical, I think, and everybody does need to see that. Where's it go next? I'm not asking you the what or when of where this is, where's things that make you go or the podcast or anything else in 5 years, but you're pulling at these fascinating threads still, both in the way you organize your writing and the way you choose these conversations, especially with, and I do love, I'm blanking on the name, what the other podcast where you talk sports.
Are you not entertained? Yeah, that's.
Are you not entertained? Thank you. I'm watching this ripple of just having these conversations with with peers, with friends, and with other people. Where do you want to see this continue to go? Or is
Matt,
it just the fact that it continues? Is that all that matters?
yeah, it's interesting. I learned a long time ago that having plans is not the best thing for me. I never had a plan in the early part of my career that didn't get completely torn up and thrown out the window in a very short space. There isn't a 5-year plan that survived the first year of it. And so I've embraced that kind of chaos and that uncertainty, and it's freed me up to be opportunistic. And when things come along that you get an opportunity to do, try them, and the sports podcast is a perfect example of that. As I said, as we talked at the top of the show, I love sport, and a dear friend of mine wanted me to help him with a sports podcast, and he's deep in the industry and a very well-respected name and voice in the industry. And I'm just a fan, but I knew how to make a podcast. So I figured, fine, he'll want me to show him how to turn his mic on and where to plug his headphones in. And then, he'll be off on his own and he won't need me anymore. And we're 5 or 6 years into that now. And it's a joy every time I get to do one of those with him. And so, for me, as long as I'm enjoying doing this, I'll keep doing it. And as long as ideas come to me that I think would be fun to do, but would also benefit a potential audience, I'll do them. I'm in the process now, in fact, of working on something with one of my former co-founders of Real Vision, Remy Tito. We're working on a research product called the Principled Investor, because we're trying to help people understand the importance of. I just gave a presentation about investment versus speculation, and how many people believe they're one, but they're in effect the other, and the importance of understanding who you are. I literally just published yesterday a piece on this. And I think without understanding who you are, it's impossible to do things the right way, because you're going to make poor decisions. So how do we help people, first of all, understand who they are, and then show them, okay, look, here's something interesting. This is a great idea. This is a great theme. This is a great topic. But what do you do about it if you're an investor? And what do you do about it if you're a speculator? And how do you tear the two apart? And how do you get your expectations set the right way? And how do you marry your risk tolerance with the way that you tackle a particular idea? And there's so little time devoted to this kind of stuff, right? There's so little time spent helping people understand the very, very basic building blocks of what we all think we're here to do, which is, invest and make money. But it's funny, in the presentation, I showed these slides of GameStop and AMC, and all the headlines, all the media. Retail investors flocked to GME and AMC. They weren't investors. Not one of them was an investor. This is a 2-day thing. You look at the chart. There's no investment going on whatsoever. It's pure speculation. And it's fine. If you're a speculator, but you understand you're a speculator, you look at GME and AMC in a completely different way. If you're an investor, you're running away from it. If you're a speculator, you're running towards it. But so many people think they're one and they have the mindset of the other, and it's a guaranteed way to get into trouble. So how do you help people understand those differences? How do you help them learn to recognize who they are, work out what that means for their risk tolerance, work out what that means for the things they shouldn't go anywhere near, the things they should stay away from, and how do you help the kind of the speculators among us understand when to run towards something and how to take risk on appropriately? And so, Remy and I have been talking about this for a long, long time, and it's something that we're both so interested in. And Remy learned this the hard way. He went through a massive life-changing event in crypto when the Terra Luna thing broke down. Remy lost life-changing money. But going through that with him, seeing how he handled it and how he dealt with that failure and how he can talk about that failure and understand exactly what he did wrong and why, has been incredible to watch. And he took a lot of flack, and he faced up to it, and he owned it, and he learned lessons, and it's made him a much, much better investor. So how can we help people do that, perhaps without the pain that Remy went through? How can we have that conversation with people? So that I think there are always going to be things that occur to you naturally when you're just sitting down thinking about the world, and you think, well, wouldn't that be an interesting thread to pull on? Wouldn't that be an interesting conversation to have with people? And I'm lucky that through 15 years of writing and the Real Vision journey, I have an audience. I do have an audience, and I can go to them and say, hey, is this interesting? Would you be interested in this? And they might go, yeah, not really. Great. That's perfectly fine. I know that people are interested. And if they're not interested there's no point doing it, which is great. How good to be able to find that out rather than to do it and then try and flog a dead horse and say, hey, why does no one care about this? Better to find out first. So, I don't know what's next is the simple answer. I know it's not doing nothing. I know that's not next for sure. It'll be something that I'm interested in. It'll be something I'm passionate about, and it'll be something I feel can hopefully help people. If it ticks those 3 boxes, then, even if it's pole dancing, I guess I'll take a swing at it.
Maybe don't put that one on YouTube, but I mean, by all means, have at it.
This the guaranteed smallest audience in history.
Well, the problem is if it's not the smallest audience in history.
Yeah, well, listen, that's not my problem. That's the audience's problem. Believe me.
Well, I have some notes. I want to invite you to interject on these because I just think this is so worth reflecting on with this conversation here. So interrupt me as we go through this. But that last thing that you ended on about having an audience, I can't help but, and even the pole dancing comment, connect back to this. Like, one of the first things you said was, we reserve the right to be unreasonable. And you talked about being a latchkey kid and supporting a team. And isn't that having the audience? Isn't that just like the block you grew up on with your friends that you can rank on everybody, that you can have your stand by me moments, your this is our time speeches, and come back together?
I think it is. I think this, no one does a better job of talking about community than the Epsilon Theory team, right? No one does a better job of talking about why that's important. And I think these communities are self-selecting. I've, as I said, I've got a heap of subscribers who've been there with me for 15 years, and I've got people who've come and gone, and it just wasn't for them, which is great. I mean, thanks for giving me the opportunity.
Fine.
But you build these communities, and I think one of the big problems that people have, and I think it's a common one in this day and age, is the idea that building a community is the goal, is the end, that you need to say, okay, I want to build a big community here, so I'm going to do this because I think that will create this big community. And we saw this at Real Vision. This was really kind of where my views about the company diverged with the other founders. And this is the point where I kind of stepped off that train, was the end and the aim became the size of the audience and not the content. And for me, that was just the tail wagging the dog. And I felt that if you decide that the size of your audience is the most important thing, then no matter who you are or what you do, you have to alter your content, because whatever content you're producing, it has an audience. There's a finite audience to that content. If you're a monster truck guy, the monster truck crowd are going to love it. So how do you reach the monster truck crowd? But if you want to embrace the hot rod crowd, you have to change the content if you want to get past that natural community. And so it's a much slower process, but if you make the integrity of the content the key, and you allow that audience to grow organically over time, it may not grow to the size you want it, and it may not grow as quickly as you want it, but as it grows, it becomes organically bigger and it becomes sticky, because those people have come to you not because you've gone out and sold them the idea of the content. They've gravitated towards it because it resonates with them. And so in the content business, when I spoke to friends who were in the business who know to this day far more about it than I'll ever know, and I talked about the churn rates that the average financial letter has, it blew my mind. Absolutely blew my mind. Now, these letters are enormous. The audience they have are incredibly big, because they go out and they have paid advertising campaigns, and they go out with the attempt of getting another 100,000 people in the door, and that's terrific. and 99,000 of those people will leave after their subscription expires, and 1,000 will stay. And that's also terrific. It's a numbers game. But that, to me, is a much more stressful way of building an audience, because you've got to replace those 99,000 people, because you've got to gear up your infrastructure to support them. And then they all go and you've got to replace them. So every year you're trying to replace the people you've lost instead of trying to grow. Whereas if you can right-size your infrastructure for what it is you're trying to do, make the content the only thing that matters, and then be satisfied with the audience that you build. For me personally, I understand that my motivations are very different to some people, but for me, you ultimately know that you're writing for a group of people who, if you're a week late in publishing, are going to email you in the hundreds and go, "Hey, weren't we supposed to get a letter? I mean, what a gift that is." And
Something's missing from my life.
Yeah.
Where are you?
It's unbelievable.
Yeah, that's trust.
Yeah. And it's a community, and every community has its size, and that community will hopefully grow over time, but it's going to grow with people for whom what you say or write or air really resonates. And we all know that when we find that material, when we find that person who we feel a kinship with, who we feel a connection to, it's incredibly powerful. And that's the power of community. It's not the fact that the internet allows us to reach so many people and build big communities, but to get them, we have to dilute and change, and maybe tweak the content here, we can get that part of the Venn diagram. I think that there's a lack of integrity in that, and ultimately it's self-defeating.
There's a piece in here, and there's another thread that I'm not going to ask you to pull now, but it's you and your dad going back to Craven Cottage. It's going back to that Fulham game. It's you grow the audience for the right reasons, who have the right draw and respect. It's Trailer Park Kid Clint Dempsey showing up and playing for Fulham, right, and bringing in a new era of American fans to a club and wanting to know this history and understand it and seeing it embraced. There's that through line to what it means to gather in public. You talked more about the way and the why that we watch sports, to see something that we know we're incapable of, and to build this experience around like the trust of something that we're not capable of doing, but we want to bear witness to it in community with others. We want not the Harry Kanes, the Uncle Harrys in our life, who can come in and wow us with something and open up a whole new door to different things that we can do out in the world, and just say there's another thing for us to experience as people. I love him as the gateway to the whole, like, I want to be an FX trader.
Yeah.
And then you landing and realizing the greatest job in your life in your 20s on this desk.
Well, Matt, you know, it's funny. Just this past weekend, I was with some friends in Scotland for a birthday party, and we played some golf, and we had dinners, and we laughed and we joked. And one of the guys who came is a very talented musician, and he brought his guitar, and he brought he's Scottish, so he brought his moothie, his harmonica.
Oh, all right.
And he said, "Oh, should I get my guitar? Should I play some?" I said, "Yeah, it'd be great fun." So he gets the guitar out, and we're sitting around a fire at midnight until 2 a.m, singing, and I took a moment, and I just kind of sat back, and I saw 16 people that I love dearly, all sitting around this fireplace in that moment, communing with a guy who's an incredibly talented musician, singer, guitarist, just incredibly talented. And just watching him do that and watching the reaction of those people around him was fantastic. And I was talking to him about it, the next day. And he said, the joy I get is in doing this and seeing how much joy it gives other people. So there's this exchange of, wonder on the part of the people that can't do that, can't play guitar and can't. And you watch them hear someone they know, like a friend, and this guy, I haven't known him as long as some of the other guys there, so some of them didn't know that he was a guitarist or whatever. It's amazing to watch the awe on people's faces. First of all, you hear that, oh, wow, he can play guitar. Then you see him realize, oh my God, he can really sing. And after that moment, after that realization that, wow, I'm in the presence of talent here, it's just pure enjoyment. The talent, it's not taken for granted, but it's just there, and it's just there to be enjoyed. And so everybody just had this amazing time because we had this one incredibly talented musician there. Without him, we would have had a different kind of great time. But he and his talent made it a night that I know everyone there is not going to forget in a hurry. And he got every bit as much out of it, just from a completely different angle. There's something real about that kind of exchange, that kind of honest exchange of talent for appreciation that, frankly, in a kind of sales-driven world, there's all too little of these days, I think.
There's this metaphor that ran through this entire talk of being a latchkey kid and of the latchkey, and the idea of like, you let yourself in and out, and you let yourself in and out of the block of those experiences. You let yourself in and out of careers as those experiences. Your own children become global latchkey kids of a form, right, who are unshackled from the front door lock, and seeing that, but those latchkeys everywhere being the right kind of that freedom is the ability to experience moments like what you experienced around that campfire with people. Like, the latchkey is not a lock to keep you out. It's an ability to go out into the world and seek the relationships.
Yeah, it's so true. And I hadn't thought about it that way, but it's so true. The key is the key. You do have a key. You've as a latchkey kid, you always had a key in your pocket. And maybe it doesn't just open one door. Maybe it doesn't just open the back door of your own house. Maybe having this idea of having a key in your pocket is something that your entire life allows you to open other doors, just by being humble and by being open and by embracing the people you meet along the way and the opportunities you get given along the way, and not being afraid to put yourself out there and ask dumb questions and do things you're not comfortable with. I think it is, and that is, again, it's a tremendous gift to have.
You also brought up, and I love that you brought this quote and this movie into it. So, Bridge of Spies, this idea, are you worried? Would it help?
Yeah.
I want to connect that to when you start writing the "Are you worried? Would it help?" Because I feel like, especially in financial media and financial stuff, there's so many like, "Are you worried?" Like, I'm shaking you into panicked bearishness. But to actually say "would it help" is the perspective flip.
Yeah.
And when you told the story about starting to write, and just, I don't want to say you emphasized not worrying about this, but this is where mine goes with an entertainment background, is like, your main worry was like, is this entertaining? You get 50, 30, whatever things, all these summaries, all bottlenecked through this guy. Did I waste your time? Yeah. Are you worried? Would it help if I was? Or did I just give you something that made you look good to your boss? Yeah. Holy crap, man.
Well, yeah, it's funny, all of these things, we don't necessarily spend a lot of time thinking about them until someone asks us, but you realize that the thoughts are fully formed. They're all in there. You've just never sat down and thought about them yourself. It's only when someone actually asks you the question, you can talk very easily about these things. Having never really sat down and got a whiteboard out and kind of, strategized about them, it's innate, and this idea that communicating with people effectively is difficult. I don't think it is. I think we can all do it, right? Because that's what we do our entire lives. Life is just a string of communications. Doing it effectively, for me, what I've found is just taking ego out of it. And if you can take ego out of it and just be curious and try to learn from people and try not to, either impose your own views or try and persuade them that the way they see the world is perhaps not right and you're more right than they are. This idea of listening. And I always had this kind of benchmark in my head for the conversations when I was at Real Vision, that if I'm interviewing someone for an hour and I talk for more than 5 or 6 minutes of that hour, I feel like that's cheating the audience and it's cheating me, because I've never learned anything listening to myself talk. So every minute I'm talking and not listening to the guests, that's something I could be learning rather than talking about. And the audience, they didn't come to see me. They came to see me talk to this other person and see what I can get them to talk about and see what we can kind of tease out of them. And so, I think that the secret to communication is actually pretty simple. Just listen a lot more than you talk. And it sounds simple. And occasionally I find myself getting, when we talk about an idea and I get giddy and I want to kind of talk about how I feel about a certain thing, or, oh yeah, have you thought about this? And I have to just slow down, let the thought develop. And if you get a chance to ask the question, great. If it comes up organically, great. If it doesn't, don't interrupt the thought because you want to chime in with either expanding it yourself or another question. Let people, give them the time to talk and develop their thoughts. Because what you find, particularly these unscripted conversations, and you know this as well as anybody, if you give people room to talk, if you give people the space to develop their own thoughts, you'll get some fascinating stuff. People will talk about things that they've never thought. I've had people in my interviews go, I hadn't really thought about this before, and that's just time and space. It's just give people that time and space to do that, and they'll never let you down. Thoughtful people can't help but be thoughtful. You've just got to get out of the way and let them do it.
I love that your business advice is to never have a plan, and your life advice is to always have a conversation.
Listen, I'd be the worst self-help guru in the world.
Grant, you've given us so much of your time, and I appreciate this so greatly. Please tell our audience, where can they find you? Where can they keep up to speed on the principled investor piece? Where can they find all the things these days?
Thank you, Matt. This has been so much fun. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you. Very simple, grant-williams.com. Everything I do is on there. On Twitter, I'm at TTMYGH, which is just the acronym of things that make you go, if you can't remember it. And theprincipledinvestor.com, that will launch towards the tail end of this year. But people can send us their email addresses, and we'll keep them posted as and when we kind of develop that little idea of ours over the coming months. But this has been so much fun. I was really looking forward to doing this with you, having watched your work, and you put me to shame. This has been fantastic. Thank you.
Grant Williams, you are truly an intentional investor. Best of luck to Fulham. Best of luck to
We'll
England,
need it next year.
renaming their new captain. You have a good day. Take care.
Cheers, man.
Thanks for tuning in. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe wherever you're watching The Intentional Investor so more people can find our show. You can follow Matt directly at cultishcreative.com or at cultishcreative on Twitter. For more great content at the intersection of investing and life, check out epsilontheory.com or at epsilontheory on Twitter.